Kia ora, welcome back to our next topic, which is looking at the demand curve. Now, we've already seen in the demand curve the law of demand. As the price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. And what we're going to do is take this idea, this law, and illustrate or model why it's true. So what we're going to do by the end of the unit is to have derived a demand curve. But before we can do that, we need to take a new term and then break it down and then use it to show how a demand curve is derived. And the term, of course, is utility. And utility is the satisfaction that comes from buying goods and services, from consuming them, to use an economic word. And of course, we know the purpose of buying goods and services is to get satisfaction. So this satisfaction in economics, we use the term utility. And the aim is to maximize satisfaction. The assumption of the model is that consumers try and maximize satisfaction or utility. And of course, to do that, they have to buy goods and services. So now what we're going to do is look at the relationship between total and marginal, the total value and the marginal value. And the marginal value is particularly important in our analysis in economics. And we will look at the marginal value as we work through our graphical models. Now, total utility, of course, is the sum of all utility or satisfaction that comes from buying goods and services. In other words, it's the total amount. And the marginal value is the extra utility or satisfaction that comes from buying another unit of the good. So we've got this guy, he's thirsty. So what does he do? He has a drink. Now, he has his first glass of beer, and let's say that his total utility is 30 utils, or units of satisfaction. So from having no glass of beer to having one, what is the change in total? Well, it's 30 minus 0, which is, of course, 30. So to calculate the marginal value, all we do is simply take the total utility of the second unit from the first, or the first from 0. So in this case, before he had nothing, so he had no satisfaction or utility. He has one glass of beer and he gets 30 units of satisfaction. So his marginal utility is 30. If he has another glass of beer, well, his total utility goes up, of course. He enjoys it. But as you can see, he doesn't enjoy it as much as the first glass of beer. It's still good, but his marginal utility now, 55 minus 30, is 25. So his marginal utility is actually decreased, even though, of course, his total utility is going up. Now, if he decides to have another glass of beer, well, his total utility goes up to 70 units of satisfaction. So his marginal utility is 15 utils, or units of satisfaction. So very easy to calculate. And so what I'm going to get you to do on the next slide is to actually complete the table by calculating the marginal values. Don't forget that remember the marginal value, marginal utility, is showing the change, the rate of change in total utility. So delta TU, change in total utility. So how do we calculate? Well, you take the total utility of the first unit from having no units, so TU1 minus TU0, and then TU2 minus TU1, TU3 minus TU2, etc. So the calculation is very simple. So I'll leave you to do that and complete the table. Now this slide is looking at the relationship between the total value and the marginal value. And of course the total value is the one on top at higher values. And remember that the marginal value measures the rate of change in the total. Or in other words, it measures the slope or the gradient of the total utility curve. Now, a couple of multiple choice questions that are asked commonly about this relationship is this one in particular. And you can see, of course, that when the gradient is 0, the gradient of the total utility curve, the gradient equals, at its maximum, equals 0. And so automatically you can see, because we've plotted the marginal utility line as well, that the value is 0. So when total utility is at its maximum, marginal utility always equals 0. So then, when total utility is increasing, marginal utility must be positive. It's increasing. It's above 0, as you can see. It's because I've plotted the marginal utility curve. And if, therefore, once this consumer has more than 6 units, you can see that the total utility is decreasing when marginal utility is negative. So now we're in a better position to begin to derive a demand curve. Now this is Greg's demand curve for beer, and on the y-axis, the vertical axis, we've got price. And we're going to make the price equal to marginal utility. Now I'll explain that in more detail in the next couple of slides. But as you can see, that as Greg buys more beer, first glass, second glass, third glass, he's only willing to buy more if the price goes down. $5, he'll buy 1. $4, he's prepared to buy 2. 3, he's prepared to buy 3, etc. So we can see that there is a negative relationship between price and quantity. When the price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. And of course, when the price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. It increases. So the variables, the price and the quantity, are inversely related. They move in opposite directions. And so for this reason, demand curves are negatively sloped and the gradient therefore is negative. Now remember, what we are concentrating on, focusing on, is how to derive a demand curve. And the demand curve, of course, is based on the law of demand. As the price goes down, quantity demanded will increase, ceteris paribus. Now, the law of diminishing marginal utility is the law on which the law of demand is actually founded. So we need to understand this law of diminishing marginal utility. Well, you can recognize the words. You already know what a law is, something that's always true. Diminishing, decreasing, marginal is extra, and utility is satisfaction. So you could probably, without my help, from what you've already learned, be able to write the definition just from the words. But let's put in the missing words below. As more units of a good are consumed, the marginal or extra utility or satisfaction always diminishes, decreases. And you've already seen, for example, first glass of beer, total utility is 30, second 55, third 70. So the marginal value is highest for the first. The first glass of beer gives the highest, not total utility, it gives the highest marginal utility. And you can see when he has another glass of beer, the marginal utility always decreases. And of course, this is true in any circumstance, really. If you go and see a movie the first time and you really like it, and you go back a second time, well, you probably will still really like it, but you won't be as good as the first time. And this would be true of drinking beer as well. The first glass is when you're thirstiest, and so it's going to yield the most extra or marginal utility. Which glass of beer has the highest marginal utility? Well, of course, it's the first. And finally, can you think of an example where marginal utility could be negative? Well, I'll leave that with you to think about. If you're not sure, just look at the pictures. Now we need one more thing before we can actually derive our demand curve, and that is to look at the term consumer equilibrium. Now when we see the word equilibrium in economics, it's usually the best place to be. And for a consumer, because we have assumed that a consumer is trying to get as much satisfaction as possible, consumer equilibrium means that he's doing just that. He's maximizing his total utility or satisfaction. He's maximizing his total utility. And we say that this will happen if the optimum purchase rule is followed. Optimum, of course, meaning the highest purchase to buy, and rule or law. It's also called the equimarginal rule in some textbooks. The examiner tends to use the optimum purchase rule if it appears in the exam. But they all mean the same thing. And basically, consumer equilibrium will be achieved or reached if consumers follow the optimum purchase rule, and that is they will only pay a price equal to their marginal utility. So when buying a good, consumers reach equilibrium when the price paid equals the marginal utility received. Now we're going to take this idea and put it with the law of diminishing marginal utility to explain how a demand curve is derived. So as you can see here, we've got Greg's demand curve for beer, and he is willing to buy up to 5 glasses of beer, but the only way he'll buy more beer, according to the demand curve that we can see of Greg, is if the price goes down. So if the price goes from 5 to 4, he'll buy 2 glasses of beer. 4 to 3, he'll buy 3 glasses. 3 to 2, he'll buy 4 glasses, etc. And so what we're going to do now is apply the two things that we know, the two concepts. We know if Greg buys more beer, and Greg knows if he buys more beer, what will happen? He knows that his marginal utility will decrease. How does he know that? Because it's a law. It always happens. The law of diminishing marginal utility says, as you buy more of a good, your marginal utility will always decrease. Now for Greg to maximize his total utility, he will not pay a price below his marginal utility. Now Greg knows his marginal utility is going to go down, so the price he pays must equal his marginal utility. So the price also must decrease for him to stay in equilibrium. And in equilibrium, he'll maximize his total utility. So that's why Greg is willing to pay most for the first unit, because it gives the highest total utility. So this slide really is providing you a model answer for the question that often appears in the final exam and of course in tests. And the formulation of the question may be different, and I've written it in 3 ways here, but the answer is the same. It wants the same answer. So you can read the formulations. It's usually worth 2 to 3 marks, and what you have to do is to complete your model answer is just to put in the missing words. And so you can see that the first word is law. The law of diminishing marginal utility states as consumption increases of a good, the marginal utility will always decrease. Therefore, if a consumer is to maximize total utility, in other words, to reach equilibrium where price equals marginal utility, the price must decrease as marginal utility decreases. So I would leave you to complete that and make sure that you have a clear memory of this for your first test and of course later for the final exam. Don't forget to go through the unit and select your vocab, and as you write the words or the economic terms on the left, make sure that you don't write long sentences to explain the meaning of the words. It's better to find synonyms, even if you're using your own language, to help you remember what the words mean. But it's up to you, but that's my advice.